Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Elections Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. All eyes this week in Israeli political circles have been on the stormy lead-up to the primaries of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party that are taking place on Monday. No matter what the results end up being, the battle over the primaries themselves has shown a bright spotlight on the cracks between the party's rank and file and the leader who has, until now, ruled the party with an iron hand, much the way that President Donald Trump has dominated the GOP in the United States. Here to discuss this and the rest of the week's political news is our panel. We've got, first of all, Haaretz senior analyst Esther Solomon. Welcome, Esther.
Hi.
And joining us is Haaretz correspondent Judy Maltz. Judy, as Haaretz readers know, has been spending her time crisscrossing the country, taking the pulse of Israelis ahead of their trips to the polls. We'll be talking with Judy about what she's seen and heard on her latest stops. Judy, welcome to the podcast again.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, a quick look at the polls. Once more, as it has been for the past several weeks, the Zionist opposition parties, led for the moment by Gadi Eisenkot's Yashar party, is sitting in the aggregated polls on the Haaretz election tracker at 60 seats. That's one seat short of forming a coalition. And this week, the Netanyahu coalition, the parties making up the current government, is in the weakest edge of the range it has been sitting at only 49 seats. The Arab parties, which we know could tip the scales one way or the other, are up to 11 seats from 10 as they've been regularly polling. So Netanyahu, the Likud, the government coalition are all clearly struggling. The prime minister has reason to worry. If the election were being held right now, he would have little chance of forming a coalition. Even this new Zionist home party, which is not really opposition and not coalition, but open to the possibility of joining Netanyahu, is only polling at 4 seats. So even if they joined, they'd only hit 53 seats overall. But this week, Netanyahu has even more to worry about inside his own party with the Likud primaries. Netanyahu, as we've mentioned in the past, tried to cancel the primaries, wanted to name his Knesset slate himself. Failing that, he has reserved 9 slots up top for the candidates of his choice. It has been a bitter fight over these primary slots. Some members have left the parties as the campaign has taken place. We have, in the overall race now, at least 2 new parties founded by people who left the Likud, and after the primaries shake down, there are likely to be other refugees joining these smaller parties after they're knocked out of spots on the list where they would otherwise realistically make it into the Knesset. And some of these potential refugees are top ministers in the government. So, Esther, what is going on inside the Likud? Has Bibi lost control?
Well, I certainly wouldn't go quite as far as that. I think actually Netanyahu is trying to entrench his control, and what he's trying to do is to say that this is no longer about the Likud party. This is about me. This is about Netanyahu. I own this party. I control it. You're either in or you're out, and I control every single aspect of it. So he's basically gone towards the kind of vote rigging stage of his control of the party. There are supposed to be open democratic elections by Likud members, which the Likud party in the past has been quite proud that it had these kind of democratic processes, even though there were extreme pressures from time to time put on those electors. But this time he has basically put his stamp on it completely to say that almost a third of the likely candidates who, according to current polls, will get elected into the Knesset will be his personal choice, and he has parachuted his own people into them.
Judy, is this about politics? We just ran a piece by David Issacharoff a couple of days ago headlined, "Israel's largest political party isn't enabling the far right, it is the far right." And David wrote that the far right is not only the parties of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that Likud, which was once supposedly the sensible, normal center-right wing, is now a huge, powerful expression of the far right. Is that the way you think Likud is perceived these days in the Israeli public?
Yeah, and I think it's more than just these days. This has been going on at least since November 2022. And in fact, probably most of the people who are on Ben Gvir's list would feel perfectly at home in the Likud. And I think many, probably the majority today of those on the Likud list would fit in perfectly in Ben-Gvir's party. There really is no ideological difference anymore. And this is a far, far cry from the Likud that was under Menachem Begin, for example. In fact, most of the most prominent names in the Likud back then, they have all since left, since Netanyahu came on board and took control of this party.
Esther, we can't talk about Netanyahu's tricks and maneuvering without mentioning a guy that I personally had never heard of before, named Oren Dobronsky. Actually, I thought I never had anything to do with him, but it turns out that years ago on a trip to California, I did eat hummus in his restaurant. So who is Oren Dobronsky and how did he get into the headlines?
So I hope the hummus was good, but Oren Dobronsky is an Israeli expat who's been living in Silicon Valley for several decades now. He went there already as a high-tech entrepreneur, and he has become what I called in a recent piece chickpea impresario since then. He founded a chain of hummus eateries in California, and he is a diehard Netanyahu fan. And bizarrely enough, Netanyahu has decided to offer him a spot on the Likud list. It raised quite some noise when it was first announced because not that long ago, meaning just a month or two ago, Oren Dobronsky called President Trump a morally corrupt piece of shit, if we're allowed to say those kinds of words on the podcast, because of his dissatisfaction with the US president's ceasefire agreement with Iran, which since then has somewhat deteriorated. But that was very much the reaction of a lot of people on the Israeli right and even in the center as well, that Trump had left Israel out in the cold when he was negotiating the settlement. But it still was quite a move to make to bring someone who was quite so crudely oppositional to Trump into the Likud list. But the more important thing is that he is 100% loyal to Netanyahu, and that's what Netanyahu wants. You know, other things about Oren Dobronsky fit in very well to what we could perhaps term the far-right party that the Likud has become. He is all for destroying Gaza until not even a cat is left alive. That was one of the quotes that he said at the time. There's also another element, which is that Netanyahu wanted to bring him on to lead what he sees as a post-election artificial intelligence ministry. This is a kind of long-term interest of Netanyahu to frame Israel as a potential powerhouse for AI. It is the reason that he's met up with Elon Musk several times to discuss this. And Dobronsky is also a fan of Elon Musk as well, perhaps less in terms of AI, but more in terms of the fact that he likes Elon Musk's conspiracy theories about how the left has infiltrated and contaminated democracies in the West, including the judiciary, which is obviously a key theme that Netanyahu likes as well.
I would add to this another very weird thing about this appointment is that Oren Dobronsky's father is I don't know if it's the president or the chairman of the World Yisrael Beitenu, which is a party in the opposition that is headed by Netanyahu's longtime political rival, Avigdor Lieberman.
The other thing that is kind of bizarre and completely hypocritical about this decision by Netanyahu is that he's bringing someone who's really a long-time expat who has not lived in Israel for many years at the same time as Netanyahu's own government is doing its best to try and stymie and put obstacles in the way of Israelis from abroad who are determined to come to Israel to vote.
Let's get get into that about the voting from overseas, voting from abroad issue. What exactly is the government trying to do? We had a story about a month ago in Haaretz that senior figures in the transportation ministry are concerned about so many expats returning to the country motivated to vote for the opposition, that they were discussing possible ways to prevent it, like limiting charter flights to Israel ahead of the election or something like that. What are people saying about the people who want to come and vote from abroad? And would it necessarily work in the opposition's favor and not in Netanyahu's?
One of the organizations, or the main, it might be even the only at this point, organization that's involved in this effort is an organization called AID. It stands for America, Israel, Democracy. It was a nonprofit that was formed a few months after the most recent Netanyahu government took office and announced its plans to neuter the judiciary. So these were basically a bunch of Israeli expats who wanted to show their solidarity for the Israelis protesting back home against the Netanyahu government, the so-called pro-democracy movement. And at some point, it became clear that perhaps the only way we can really affect change is we will have to wait for the next election. So I would say it was more than a year ago that they concocted this idea that we need some major campaign to get all these Israelis who have been out on the streets at one point before October 7th, virtually every week in big cities around the world. Israelis would go out and demonstrate and video themselves and put out those videos just to show their solidarity with what was going on. And the idea is this is the next big step we can do to show our solidarity. We can come on election day and vote. Now, the thing is, they need to be very careful because they cannot say, we want you to vote for a party in the opposition, or we will only help you find out if you are eligible to vote or where you can vote if you tell us who you're voting for.
And they can't actually provide any kind of financial assistance whatsoever either.
They can't.
It's only organizational and bureaucratic.
Right. Basically what they're doing is they're telling people, register with us. If you don't know whether you're registered to vote in Israel, we will tell you whether you are or what you may have to do to register. And we'll put your names on lists and help you reserve places on flights. And if it turns out, and this may very well be the case, that all the flights will be booked a few days before Election Day, they plan to charter flights. They say that they already have more than 30,000 Israelis around the world registered with them.
And that their aim is 50,000 votes.
Right. Now, when it comes to how many seats is that worth in the Knesset? Barely one, okay? But that's not the issue. We know in a tight election, and this has happened in the past, a matter of a few thousand, even a few hundred votes could make the difference of one party getting in or not, which is why every single vote counts. And because the government has to be aware of the fact that the people behind this are those who were holding solidarity protests with the Israelis protesting the government here. They have a good idea of who are the Israelis who will be signing up with them to come vote on Election Day here.
On the other side of the scale, though, we have the Oren Dubronskis. Very common for Israelis living abroad to turn extremely right-wing, and they might also be motivated to fly in and vote. And there's always been, over the years, sort of these stories of Chabad and other ultra-Orthodox organizations flying people en masse to vote. So can we necessarily say that a large turnout of overseas Israelis is going to be necessarily push the opposition ahead?
We can't know for sure. And yes, every single election in recent memory, ultra-Orthodox parties have basically organised airlifts of their voters to Israel. So the fact that there is now some kind of theatrical outrage on the pro-Netanyahu right that people are considering flying over to vote is completely hypocritical. The vast majority of the Israelis who have left Israel over the last few years have left because of Netanyahu and his government and what is going on here. The people with the greatest motivation to actually put their money where their mouth is and come over, unless they are part of other organized efforts such as from the ultra-Orthodox camp, they will likely vote against the Netanyahu coalition.
Just to put it all in perspective in terms of scale, they say that if every Israeli living abroad came to Israel and voted, it would be worth 10 Knesset seats, which is a lot given the margins these days.
Many of them don't have Israeli IDs anymore, are not registered. It's not that many, Alison.
We're talking about a couple of votes here or there, but as Judy says, Netanyahu is desperately trying to scrape every last vote he can, and so the opposition, it's in their interests also.
No one can form a government at the moment, according to the polls. Both the coalition and the opposition fall short. And let's say no one is willing to bring an Arab party into the government, or no Arab party is willing to join the government, and therefore nobody can get to over 61. If that happens, basically no one can form a coalition. There's no government. And the current coalition says if that happens, of course, they're going to stay in power until another round of elections, God help us, are held. We went through that 5 or 6 years ago when we had these multiple elections one by one because neither side could form a coalition. Right now, the buzz is around something that Gadi Eisenkot said. He is currently the leader or the best polling member of the opposition. He said, quote, if we get 58 or 59 Zionist Knesset seats, lawmakers from Zionist parties, and the other side gets 51 or 52, I will put forward a government. I won't ask anything from the Arab parties. It's their business. The main thing is to replace the government, to remove the ministers from their positions of power. He says that will happen when, quote, we have a large, clear, and decisive Zionist majority, 51 to 59, something like that. But he thinks that even if he doesn't really win the elections, that he could lead an interim government instead of the current coalition. Esther, is that something he can really do?
Sure, it's happened in the past that it's possible to have a minority government that is supported by other parties from the outside. It's kind of depressing that this is what Eisenkot has had to do because he doesn't want to risk alienating any of the voters more on the centre-right or the right who are currently quite sympathetic to him by saying that, of course, he would go into coalition with the Arab parties who would have been elected democratically, and there's no reason they shouldn't be part of any Knesset coalition. But what he's doing is basically doing half a wink, saying that we would accept their support from the outside or potentially a closer kind of arrangement in order to persuade the president to give us the mandate to form a government after the elections. All of this turns on whether Eisenkot has reached a ceiling of votes that he thinks that the anti-Netanyahu camp can't quite get to 61, which is the magic number to form a majority government. So he is covering all the options. If he falls short by just a couple of Knesset seats, then this is one option for him.
But Esther, has he ever said explicitly, like other party leaders in the opposition, that he will not sit with the Arab parties? I don't think he's ever said that, right?
He hasn't said, and that's part of a wider kind of strategy that he has, not to be too specific about many, many issues, especially the things that are kind of red button issues for various constituent parts of his potential electorate. He has not made the kinds of sweeping statements that other party leaders have done, but he also doesn't want to give red meat to the Likud and right-wing media sphere, which constantly bangs on about Eisenkot basically selling the country to the Arabs. That is more or less, in unvarnished terms, that's the accusation that the right throws at Eisenkot. And whatever he thinks about that or not, he doesn't need to give them that kind of ammunition.
Judy Maltz, it is good to see you staying in one place for a moment. You've been wandering around to place all over the country. As we know, Judy's been on the road doing features and speaking to voters in various locations about how they see the elections and how they think they're going to vote. Let's start with your trip, which was to Kfar Chabad. It was even a challenge getting people to talk to you there, was it not, Judy? I really liked your headline. You said that there, only the Messiah is more popular than Ben Gvir.
It's true. I mean, that headline really wrote itself, because you can't go to Kfar Chabad and not reach that conclusion.
That's ironic, right? One would think that the ultra-Orthodox would vote for the ultra-Orthodox parties and not be so attracted to Ben Gvir, who is religious, but he's not ultra.
Right. So that's an interesting thing. And I think it's a change that has taken place in recent years, probably ever since Ben Gvir began running in the elections. Because I did look back at election results in previous years. And it used to be that in Kfar Chabad, which I guess almost anyone who's visited Israel has passed by, because it's very close to Ben Gurion International Airport, and you see the building that is an exact replica of 770 in Crown Heights. You can see it from the road, from Highway number 1 that connects Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. In the past, yes, Chabad is not officially affiliated with any particular party in the Knesset, and they do like to say always that they are nonpartisan and non-political, because unlike, for example, the Gur Hasidim, who have Agudat Yisrael, they don't have a party in the Knesset. But the truth is, in past elections, they did, the vast majority of voters there did vote for Agudat Yisrael, which is today part of United Torah Judaism, and it's the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party. When Ben Gvir has run on his own, he was the most popular party there. He got a plurality of the votes. And in the last election, Ben Gvir and Smotrich ran together under the religious Zionism label, and that party was also the most popular. But if you talk to people there, nobody talks about Smotrich. He's not on their radar at all. It's all about Ben Gvir. They love Ben Gvir. Now, to me, that's not surprising because I've been covering Chabad a lot over the years. But for most people in Israel, as well as outside Israel, most Jewish people are shocked by that. What? Ben Gvir, Chabad, that wonderful, inclusive, non-judgmental movement, those friendly rabbis and shluchim, what do they have to do with Ben Gvir? Well, here's what, when you talk to people in Kfar Chabad, what they tell you. They all listen to one person when it comes to who they should vote for, and that person is the Rebbe, who died more than 30 years ago, but that doesn't matter. And the Rebbe once said that you must vote for the party that ensures the wholeness of the Jewish people, the wholeness of the Torah, and the wholeness of the land of Israel. The wholeness of the land of Israel means to them the party that will be least likely to concede 1 centimeter of the West Bank. And they have reached the conclusion that that party is Jewish Power, Otzma Yehudit, the party founded by Ben Gvir. more so than Smotrich. They feel Smotrich is a bit weak there, if you talk to them.
He's weak on the West Bank, huh?
Yes, they feel he's weak on the West Bank. And a number of them have noted in conversations, how after the Gaza war, Ben-Gvir pulled out of the government. So he is more a man of principle. He pulled out of the government because he didn't like the hostage deal that Netanyahu was trying to push, whereas Smotrich stayed in. So he is a true man of integrity. Interestingly enough, they also say that the Rebbe always told them to vote for the most Haredi party. Now, most of us think of Haredi as ultra-Orthodox, so that would probably be United Torah Judaism. But no, for them, clearly Haredi has taken on a new meaning, and it probably means for them, the most extreme, the most rigid, which obviously that would define...
The most nationalistic.
Yes. And
ethno-nationalistic.
Yes. And that would define Ben-Gvir as far as they're concerned.
So let's talk about your other two stops since you last joined us, Judy. One was Sderot, a very traumatized community, not only by missile attacks, but was literally infiltrated by terrorists on October 7th. And you also went to one of the largest Arab cities in Israel, Al-Fahim, which also has one of the lowest rates of voter turnout in the country. So any surprises in those two places?
Well, Al-Fahim, I visited after I visited Rahat, the Bedouin city of Rahat. And, people tend to clump all Arab voters together here. And it's a mistake, I think, because Rahat is the biggest Arab city in Israel. And I think we came away from the visit to Rahat with the idea that people there are determined to vote. And they, just like Arab voters around the country, they're very upset about what has happened here in recent years. And their way of responding is to go out and vote out this government. In Al-Fahim, and this was my impression, that is not the case at all, especially among young people and young educated people. They feel so alienated. They actually feel, many of those whom we spoke to, and most of them did not want to be quoted, but it was very sad in a way that these young educated people, students at institutions like Tel Aviv University, the Technion, really bright people with promising futures, they had reached the conclusion that they had no future here in this country, and that by voting, they would be normalizing a very, very bad situation, and they just were going to sit it out. Now, who knows? That could all change. When you talk to people and they say, I'm not going to vote. And they say, under no circumstances, well, I'm going to decide the day before or that day. So we'll see. Now, in Sderot, I did see something of what we're hearing more and more about these days, which is that in Likud strongholds, which Sderot has long been, at least since the 1980s, there is a lot of empathy for Gadi Eisenkot. And people who in the past would have voted Likud are definitely thinking of voting Eisenkot. The original residents of Sderot, which started out as a development town, these were North African Jews, and Eisenkot himself is the child of Moroccan Jews, and that means a lot there. And, there's also, we always talk about this, the likability factor. And people don't have anything really bad to say about him there. Even though, at the same time, it's clear that the way the people there have been affected by October 7th is that it has definitely pushed them more to the right. But that is not necessarily going to be translated into them voting for even more far-right parties or even sticking with Likud.
That sort of relates back to our earlier conversation when Gadi Eisenkot was being careful not to say, I will bring Arab parties into my coalition if necessary, because he doesn't want to alienate these kinds of voters, right, Judy?
Right, exactly. I mean, these are the voters in places like Sderot and these other development towns that could, well, there's so many different factors that could tip the election, but that definitely is one of them.
On a serious note, Judy and Esther, there were some death threats against Gadi Eisenkot this week. The Shabak, the security service, is considering giving him full protection, as they do government officials. How worried do you feel about potential political violence? It seems like violence is in the air in Israel these days. Everyone is very upset over what is happening in the West Bank. Things are not quiet, obviously, either on the Lebanon or Gaza front. But in terms of the political scene, I think all of us over a certain age are a little scarred by how the vicious campaign atmosphere ended with Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. And we're worried about what parts of the Netanyahu coalition are going to do if it becomes really clear that they're going to lose these elections. Do you feel anything going on? Are you worried about the potential for violence?
I think everyone here should be worried about the potential for violence because, as you say, we've seen it happen in reality. And there is an element of violence at many of the protests that happen. It's on the edges now, but it might become something much more threatening. I would say that we're still in August and it's still summer holiday territory, and Israelis are giving themselves a little bit of headspace out of the contest, but things are going to really ramp up once the school starts and people go back to work in September. And then when the pre-election rallies across cities in Israel will start happening on a far more regular and large-scale basis. And I think that there is the potential for friction that turns into political violence and potentially a more targeted kind of violence at party leaders is more than a potential threat. We know that that is something that can happen.
Party leaders from one side of the spectrum, I would say.
Yeah, as political violence in Israel has almost 100% come from the right.
Wrapping up, ladies, as is our tradition, let's close out by telling me what you will be looking at most closely in the week ahead in the campaign and the political developments. Judy, you go first. I guess in your case, I should also ask where you're headed next.
Well, I'm headed to a very, very interesting city this week, Kiryat Shmona. It's right on the Lebanese border, and pretty much since October 7th, most of the people who live there have not lived there. I think probably about half, maybe a little more are back now, but still all the population is not back home just yet. In November 2022, 50% of the voters in Kiryat Shmona voted for Likud. Last week, Gadi Eisenkot was there. It was a packed room of people who came to hear him. So I will be very interested in going in my trip to Kiryat Shmona this week to hear from people who once voted Likud how they are planning to vote in the upcoming election, given everything that has happened in the past 3 years.
Esther, what are you going to be looking at? I imagine first and foremost how these Likud primaries shake out, but what else?
Apart from the Likud, I'm going to keep my eyes on the West Bank and what's going on there. There is so much going on there. There's this ongoing bananas and totally immoral campaign of intimidation in the West Bank village of Kusra. But I, on Friday, went to a solidarity protest in the largely Christian village of Beit Sahor, where settlers from an outpost very nearby who took over a building actually fired over our heads. So that was quite a bit of drama to experience. What was depressing there was the fact that the army so clearly was so friendly with the settlers there, And this is not a new story. Obviously, Haaretz has been reporting on what's been going on in the West Bank and the fact that the atmosphere there is reaching kind of power keg explosive proportions that could easily have a major impact on the elections. But also what I'm interested in is if the US, the Trump White House, continues to denounce in pretty strong terms what is going on there. Now, the US ambassador, Mike Huckabee, called the settlers in Kusra Israeli terrorists. That was a very, very unusual term that he used. It's interesting to know if the US will start pressuring Netanyahu on this particular issue. And then how will Netanyahu react? Will he accept some of that criticism and tell the army to actually do its job? Or will he decide to open a front against Trump? Because Trump, although he was his big election co-star in the past, has lost some of his shine, especially on the Israeli right. So it's a question about whether he wants to stand up and say he is the Israeli leader who's standing up to a US president and looking after the project of entrenching Israeli control over the West Bank and in general protecting Israel's sovereignty against a foreign leader. That would be a pretty wild thing to do, but it's not unimaginable at this stage.
Well, that is definitely something to keep our eye on. And really, the results of these Likud primaries are going to be very telling, I think. I just want to wrap up by thanking my great panelists. Esther Solomon, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, as always.
Thank you.
And Judy Maltz, enjoy your road trip. Stay safe as you head up to Kiryat Shmona.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Election Podcast. Thanks to Esther Solomon again, and Judy Maltz, and producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you'd like to keep listening to the podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, if you're so inclined, leave us a comment or a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, and the latest city that Judy Maltz is visiting, don't forget to subscribe to and follow haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.